Welcome to another episode of Writer and Politics. We have today with us Kishalay Bhattacharjee, whose new book, Che in Paona Bazar, is out. If you have got hold of it, you might be knowing what sort of things we're going to speak about. It's about one of my favorite places in India, Northeast. Kishalay, let's begin by asking, you spent, 20 years reporting from Northeast, and in the book you speak about going back to Shillong. Give a bit about your background.
I didn't spend 20 years reporting from out of the Northeast. I grew up in Shillong, which happens to be part of the so-called Northeast. And then I went back about 12 years ago, and I was reporting out of that place. Not Shillong necessarily, we were headquartered in Guwahati, but we were traveling around. And I kind of actually discovered, I won't even say rediscovered, discovered what people call Northeast or mean by Northeast, because, and this book actually discusses that, that I want to challenge this whole notion of the Northeast. We don't have a Northwest, we don't have a Southeast, we don't have a Southwest, so why is this Northeast? And that defeats a lot of, problems and issues that people actually raise from that area.
But before we go into that, give us a little of a background about you, because I know that you grew up in Shillong, but you had to move out, right? So what was that background? Because there's this whole thing against Bengalis there, and basically so give us a bit of a background.
When I grew up, Shillong was a very idyllic hill town, very European.
Even now, the houses are so colorful and nice,
So, till about 1979, I was in class 6, we didn't know how else world would be, apart from, gardens in your front yard and kitchen gardens, and you had brownies, and you had tea served in teapots and tea cozies, and that was it was a very pretty notion of life. And then suddenly one fine day, we saw the hill in front of my house was on fire, and a certain kind of policeman called CRPF arrived in that town, and there's something called curfew, and we did not know. The town were not aware of these things. Even if there was trouble in neighboring states, it did not touch Shillong, it did not touch Meghalaya. It was very idyllic. It was
that time peaceful. It was Assam, of course.
No,
it had become Meghalaya. Okay.
And then we realized that we were not liked. And who were this we? We were people who are settled there, but not indigenously from there. And there was this division we realized, between the tribal and the non-tribal, because that was the xenophobic movement that was going on there, a spillover from neighboring Assam, because in Assam there was an anti-foreigner agitation going on, which was probably the most intense agitation, a students' agitation in the country. It was the first time anywhere that a students' agitation actually took over and formed a government. But that government, of course, was formed much later. But during that time, when 79, I'm talking about the spillover happened, and in Meghalaya also, there was anti-outsider. Now, there were, I think the whole movement was completely misled, or just had lost its direction, because nobody was sure of who they were fighting against. The fight was supposed to be against illegal Bangladeshi citizens settling out there. But, so Indian Bengalis and the Bengali-speaking Bangladeshis were mixed up. Initially it started as as a target against Bengali speakers, any Bengali speaking, because
not communal, as we were trying to point it out when the Kokrajar thing happened.
It was difficult to differentiate between a Hindu and a Muslim, and later it became a tribal, non-tribal. So all non-tribals, whether you're a Punjabi or whether you're Assamese or whatever, became the target. Under those circumstances, I still completed my education there. From time to time, I wanted to leave. I came out, and then I went back. But I continued my education, and in that Irish school and the college, did my university, and then there was a very ugly incident of a batchmate who came up, and he said that you must leave the town tomorrow. You're a non-tribal.
Okay.
And he took out a little dagger out, and he pointed it out at me. It was a little ugly incident in the university campus, and more than fear, I think it was, a sense of injury, a sense of humiliation that, this is a place that I can't stay. This is not my place. This is a place where I grew up, but I don't belong to this place. And I left, and I went off to Bombay. Wanted to be a painter. Realized that I wasn't good enough. No one's going to buy my paintings, and then I joined advertising. Then I came to Delhi. For a year, I went back and became a lecturer. Actually,
Okay.
I taught English literature in a number of colleges.
Went back where to?
And I actually taught in a few colleges in Assam, then in Shillong.
Okay.
In St. Edmund's College I taught, and then I said no, it's.
Okay.
I mean, I wasn't
Too
enjoying.
bored.
Yeah, I found it monotonous, and I came back to Delhi,
Huh.
and I joined Eyewitness with Karan Thapar, which was that time a video magazine. There was News Track and there was Eyewitness. There was two video magazines which you could go to the shop and actually buy. Then it was on
Yeah.
Doordarshan. That was Doordarshan was the.
But tell us, when did you go back as a reporter to?
I went back. I went back in 2000.
2000.
The year 2000. It was a very, very, I think, heightened phase of insurgency. Assam was, in the news almost every day. I'm not very sure whether it was how much of news, but it was. I mean, it was. There were incidents in Assam every day. In Manipur too, in Nagaland. I think those three, and Tripura as well. Meghalaya was by then had, come out of this conflict situation. Meghalaya never really had
The
that
real
kind
sense,
of real sense of conflict, except for that phase where from 79 to 89 there have been very, very many incidents of what I would say ethnic cleansing, which went completely unreported. Even today, it is very difficult to actually dig out and find even FIRs of people who've gone missing or who are dead. But Assam was in a really, really bad shape. I remember the day I reached. A couple of days later, or maybe probably a couple of days later, I went to this place called Nalbari, and it was just after Diwali. The night of Diwali.
This is when the worst massacre happened?
Yeah, one of the worst massacres happened. And 11 people were killed. I mean, the temple bells were ringing, and bullets were being sprayed. And next day, when I reached that place, everything was deserted. I stood with my camera person there, and there was a shop shutter, the wooden shutter. Just moved, and a little kid came rushing and held on to me, and I picked her up. She was as old as my daughter would be back home, and I saw a little scar of a bullet below her left knee, and that's been a very recurring image of every time I close my eyes at wherever I am, of that little child running, probably a child who's lost her parents in the previous nights firing. And the rest of the time, it's actually been counting body bags. So I mean, that was the point where I started, and I think thereafter I've just counted body bags.
But Kishalay, tell me something. You of course begin by a scene at Guwahati railway station, but then the first chapter is about Manipur. Where does this stop in terms of violence? I mean, you're speaking about body bags. You spoke about, tribals or indigenous versus non-indigenous. We know what's happening in Nagaland, and then we know what is happening in Manipur. Again, then you're speaking about the fact that you don't understand the concept of Northeast. I mean, the notion of Northeast. Where has it? I mean, I really don't have an exact. I mean, I'm speaking very emotionally because even I have covered Northeast and I feel very emotionally about that place. But where has the Indian state got wrong? On whom? Is there a blame game up there? How can sort of things resolve in terms of what's happening? I mean, can't we actually have? I mean, many people say there is a normalcy returning to Northeast, but is this a real normalcy, or who is to be blamed and who is not to be blamed? And more than blamed, what's the solution?
I think solution comes from the word reconciliation. I think that's a very important word that in India we haven't learned. I think that needs to be somehow inculcated, brought into the thing. The former Home Secretary in a presentation last year had said that
Who?
Mr. G.K. Pillai,
Okay.
who's also very close to Manipur, and this is a subject that he kind of actually studies. He had said that the starting point, the point of departure for any kind of reconciliation is going to be when India, he mentioned the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, but I suppose he mentioned he meant the government of India, begins by saying sorry for the historical mistakes. There have been historical mistakes committed.
Yeah.
One can't go back and change those mistakes. So, but a sorry is going to make a lot of difference. Things have improved. Tripura is a case in point. Tripura had one of the worst record of deaths and armed conflict. Since 2007, there hasn't been a single person killed in encounter on either side. The indices, the level of governance, everything in Tripura is very high. It's one of the highest in the country. It's a state which is not even in the discourse when you talk about growth and governance.
Yeah.
But actually, it is a state which has turned around. Other states probably would.
Even Mizoram has done better than others, haven't they?
I mean,
at least in terms of
Mizoram story is a little different. It's a little different. We have to talk about Mizoram completely in a different
context.
Prism. Altogether. Yeah, there has not been death or conflict. Nothing of that sort. But there is a different kind of a danger that Mizoram faces, which is an overpowering, over-dominating role of the church. Okay, so we are not talking about governance. We are talking about an institutionalization which has come out of organizations like the YWCA or something of that sort, the Young Mizo Christian Association. But that's a different discourse. Out here we're talking about governance and we're talking about armed conflict. Tripura has done very well. Nagaland, there are fratricidal clashes. Level of extortion is very high, which also actually is violence, intimidation and extortion, but no deaths as such, no civilian deaths of that nature. Assam has become much better. The place where this girl came and hugged me, there are no armed groups there any longer. Meghalaya has always been
largely peaceful.
Peaceful. So Arunachal, just 2 districts are disturbed. So things are better.
But what about Manipur? What about Manipur?
Manipur, to me, I won't say I'm going to give up hope, but right now it's still in a point of no return.
But why is it on a point of no return? Because I have also reported, of course not as much as you have, but I just never understand. I was telling, just yesterday somebody came, and the ongoing controversy around the oil fields, which a lot of these indigenous groups don't want it to come up, and especially the underground. You enter Imphal and suddenly everything turns black and white, as if there is some sort of sadness in the whole air. And even if you ask Manipuris, it's just a blame game. Nobody knows who is exactly to be blamed. And everybody, there is no industries there. The governance is perhaps the worst in the country, or perhaps the world, or highly corrupt. The youngsters are leaving the state by dozens. It's completely sad, and 90% of the revenue is given by the central government. It's almost like a client state.
Manipur is in a very unfortunate geopolitical position. If just imagine those people in any other part of the country. So I think the geopolitics is extremely important. You forget about the history. Even the current situation in where it is. It borders Myanmar. Okay. Myanmar produces, heroin. Where does it supply it through? So it supplies it. It goes through.
That's mentioned in your book.
So it's a transit place. Manipur itself produces one of the world's best quality of marijuana. Okay. Then again, it's not just the source; it's also the consumption. So you have it's a transit, it's the source, it's the consumption of narcotics. Narco dollars are coming in and out. The stuff that goes out again comes back as psychotropics to be pumped into Southeast Asia. So part of it is consumed, part of it is, but there's the economy. So there's a narco economy there. It is also the transit point for gun running. Unfortunately, it is also in the neighboring area of Assam, which has 17 to 20 wildlife reserves. You would know that the world's 4 high volume underworld trade would be gun running, narcotics, wildlife parts, and human trafficking. All 4 happen from there or pass by there. So there is a very vibrant underworld economy that would want the situation there to be unstable. So, I mean, imagine everyone's focus is on insurgency. Not a single kingpin of narcotics has ever been caught there, okay, or anywhere in the neighborhood. I mean, is that possible?
That's true.
I mean, recently you had the army's PRO smuggling drugs across Myanmar to the tune of several crores, and now the police is saying that it's not the first time that he's done it, it's the 4th time that he's done it.
Let me ask this question. I don't know if you want to answer it. A lot of people speak about the army industry. I'm not saying arm industry, I'm speaking of the army industry in Kashmir. Is there an army industry in Northeast?
Yes, I mean, I don't know what you mean by army industry, but yeah, the army's presence there.
I mean, it benefits the army to be present there, and especially individuals. You just mentioned the
individuals.
PRO.
I wouldn't say.
I mean, as not as an institution.
Not an institution. It definitely benefits, because what happens is that in conflict areas you've got something called source money, which is unaccounted for. So it's you can if you want to, you can make money.
Manipur is a classic case, isn't it?
Even in Arunachal, at every bend, you get something called Fauji Tel, which is the fuel, which is sold. Okay. Then Manipur and Nagaland, remember, are dry states, but you have a constant source of liquor coming from the army wet canteens. Okay, so there are. I mean, any conflict zone benefits the.
But in many sense, hasn't. For example, you have the army because you have the insurgency, but aren't these, especially in Manipur, almost working in tandem with each other in terms of extortion? And I mean, we saw the fact that ASPA is there and all this, the law, which a lot of people want to be withdrawn, but army keeps on saying that it wants it to stay, especially Assam Rifles. But this 2 sort of bodies, if I may put it in that way, seems to be benefiting from each other in many sense, aren't they? I mean, none is happy if other goes, because if you wipe out one, the other is obviously going to get off the radar.
It's difficult to substantiate this.
Okay, absolutely.
I mean, I wouldn't say that it's a symbiotic relationship. I wouldn't go at that far. Individually, people have benefited. States benefit from insurgency being there or AFSPA being in place. For example, Tripura wants AFSPA to be continued. Tripura doesn't need AFSPA any longer because then you get the central funding. Okay, so. But that needs a lot more substantiation of how one benefits from the other. How would the underground groups would benefit from the army being there, and the army would benefit from the underground groups being there. One can study that and take that.
Find out something. Tell me something is about the book. It's almost a personal, sort of autobiographical in most of this, but why did you, in the preface you do mention that at times you have tried to fictionalize it, and before the interview I was speaking about the one character, the girl that you mentioned who's there throughout. Why did you feel the need to at part fictionalize it, and what is the importance of this character without giving away the story?
Okay. Now there's no story, you see. Actually this is not so much an autobiography as much as a biography of
the region,
people and the region. Many of the voices, almost 50% of it or whatever, I haven't counted that percentage, but is actually real people speaking real time to me. I haven't changed their words. Okay. Many of the words, the language remains the same. I've picked up letters from 1994, 1993, written to me about a poet on self-exile. It's actually his letters, so I haven't fictionalized that. Now, I wanted to basically portray, the angst of this generation on self-exile, say studying in Delhi,
Yeah.
not feeling rooted. So, and Manipuris have this very strong sense of roots.
Yeah.
Okay, they have self-pride. They want to go back home. They love their food. Then they go back home, and then they can't negotiate the distance. Okay, which is a dilemma. They come back, and they're constantly living with the theme of homelessness. Now, I had met a couple of such people whom I had thought I would kind of write their stories on. To have too many characters would make it a little clumsy.
Okay.
So I've kind of
Integrated
put
them.
put a couple of characters into a shade. So that's why I'm calling it part fictionalized,
Okay.
because I've kind of taken the liberty to kind of draw this these characteristics of person A and some other characteristics, and put them into into the figure of Ashay. But Ashay more or less represents her generation of people.
My last question, which is your favorite state in Northeast?
Manipur.
It comes out in your work.
Yeah, Manipur. It's fascinating.
It's a fascinating.
It's a fascinating place because of its art, its history.
It's an interesting anecdote about polo. I mean, you mentioned how it's a completely different game and how it gets incorporated into the mainstream. So-called.
The mainstream polo.
Yeah, and it's called. It's a fascinating work. And of course, you have the mention of the food outside the stadium and.
Oh yeah, the food is. I mean, I haven't found. I mean, I suppose every other community loves their food because we grow up with that food. So you kind of that's the taste that you grow up with. But I haven't found any other community so fanatic about their food. And I thought someone was asking me that why did you put food? I mean, what are the relevance of food? But the idea of the book, something which we haven't discussed really, is from it actually emerges from the fact that in so many years I was struggling with the idea of how to provide the context to the stories that I was reporting, because you report for a minute and a half or even for half an hour or 15-20 minutes, the context doesn't come through. So I picked up a few stories to be able to actually defy the notion of stereotype. I mean, that's the whole idea of writing this book. This book is not about a journalist having reported there, so I'm leaving that area.
That comes out that it's a very emotional book. One more question that comes to my mind. We began by speaking about how you're again trying to get rid of this notion of the other or the Northeast. How much of the problem is externally asserted on them, or identity issue, or how much of it is internal?
Both. There is a historical problem there. I mean, I am more. When I look at my growing up in Shillong, then I would say that the problem is within. Okay. Of identity, because I am the victim there. But if I kind of objectify, then we do impose. We do impose images. We do impose identities, which we could have done away with. That could have eased the situation out there much more. For example, I'll give you a much more technical example of ceasefires and surrenders. You're creating groups within that as well. You're giving a new identity of a surrendered militant who can seize power, but continues to wield the gun. Okay. So in a way, you've actually legitimized terror. In those many states, you have actually legitimized the idea of killing people. So people. And
many of times, these surrendered militants are getting pensions from the government, and it's
not just pension. The entire Mizoram government, from its inception, are people who ran the insurgency. In Assam, they have joined the political parties. Political parties have given them
the legitimacy.
And people were for people. I mean, I've had actually families of victims who've come to our office saying that, what do we do? The person we know who is admitted killing our children,
is now
ruling
over
over. Yeah, are we expected to go and vote for him? That is a question that the government will have to answer.
But isn't that accord, and the Mizo Accord and the Assam Accord, sort of almost a legacy of Rajiv Gandhi in many sense? I mean, it brought much sort of needed peace in Assam and Mizo.
Yeah, but are we getting peace? I mean, are we buying peace? I mean, you've seen
are we buying peace? That's a good word. Yeah.
We've always bought peace. We've always bought peace. I mean, even when the Naga peace mission, which was the first peace mission, which started trying to negotiate, that time the Naga movement, actually, I mean, an eyewitness of person who accompanied the Naga peace mission, there used to be Fokker aircraft, small aircraft, which would go land somewhere in Nagaland, and they would actually distribute salt, they would distribute wristwatches and distribute currency notes at random. So there was no direction, there was no idea of whom they were giving, they just had to pay. So he would just,
it's again pay.
Yeah, pay money. So they were buying peace. I mean, have you bought peace after 60 years in Nagaland? You haven't been able to. I mean, you're still buying. Bodoland, you've bought peace with one group. You legitimize them. You've, they're one political power. They're part of a coalition government which rules the state out there. But is there peace in Bodoland? There is no peace. You've granted them autonomy. The North Kachar Hills is India's first autonomous council. So, I mean, within 60 years, I mean, you've only spawned more and more insurgencies there. So if that, so obviously, it's proven that the policy of buying peace hasn't worked. So perhaps, there has to be a relook to see how to resolve these conflicts.
But do you think that the relative peace that we are seeing in Assam and Northeast at the moment, it's just a part of the cycle
of violence
and peace?
They say, experts say that there is a certain fatigue in each organization. So when you reach that fatigue, but the environment is still very conducive for more and more groups to come up. Because like I told you that there is a parallel economy there.
Yeah.
So someone needs to run that parallel economy.
Absolutely.
Okay. So as long as the environment is conducive, I mean, you can never say that peace has returned.
In terms of the geopolitical location, I'm sorry, I'm adding more and more questions because there's a very interesting topic for me. But in terms of the geopolitical locations, India's Look East policy, and we're trying to sort of connect and use this area as a passage, especially towards Myanmar and subsequently the other Southeast Asian countries. Will trade in any way help to, I mean, of course you spoke about the parallel economy, but this, if economy works out, it would become the mainstream. So do you look at that possibly a way in terms of finding a solution?
I think it would be naive to imagine that a Look East policy will be successful without resolving the problems in Myanmar.
In Myanmar.
So I think 2015 election, Myanmar is going to be very crucial and critical. Look East policy is a possible solution, but it's not going to work unless we have what is India's foreign policy? I mean, where is it? I mean, we don't have a neighborhood policy.
Yeah.
So we need to develop a neighborhood policy first, because Northeast again within quotes, because I mean why I'm against the word Northeast is because there is culturally, linguistically, historically no link between Manipur and Meghalaya, or Manipur and Assam, or Arunachal Pradesh and Assam. Arunachal Pradesh and Assam probably has a little more, but Arunachal Pradesh and Meghalaya. So it's wrong to club up them all together, because from Delhi then you see that area as one. Okay, that area is not one. That area are 8 states with 8 different.
And perhaps even multiple identities
within that.
Within
I mean,
themselves,
So it's a much more complex.
No, the reason, I mean, I get what you're saying is perhaps the Myanmar issue, but I'm saying internally within these 8, I mean, Sikkim, we should leave it out. I'm sure it's not into the area. But these areas, do you think that their internal things might just be resolved in case, I mean, Myanmar is another issue, but within these 8 states, would there be a much more smoother sort of passage or smoother
with the Look East policy?
With the Look East policy?
Where is the policy? What is the policy? I haven't figured that out yet.
Okay.
It's like there has to be manufacturing hubs. When you have the Lookie's policy basically is to connect
the roads
till Vietnam and Thailand. Now what are you going to transport? You are talking of surface transport as against sea route from Bombay or from Gujarat.
Which even Hillary Clinton spoke about in America, when Kolkata she gave that speech.
So which means you're basically going to just transport materials manufactured in those states by truck coming through Assam. So all that you're going to have across the Northeast are going to have tire retreading shops and motor mechanic shops or dhabas. That's not an economy that is going to change the face of that. You need manufacturing hubs out there.
No, absolutely. But tell me, I mean, the current controversy in Manipur around the oil thing, I mean, it also comes out that, I mean, first of all, the oil hasn't been found. And there is a company which has put in money and wants to find out if there is oil. Now, I can understand that subsequently, if there was environmental issues, you want to protest and blah, blah. But you want to stop it even before it starts. So in many sense, I mean, whom do you blame? I mean, it seems if the central government is actually auctioning out oil blocks so that there is industry, as you said, instead of opening dhabas, you have manufacturing or, your mineral resources extraction. But here there are indigenous groups which seem to be completely opposed to even, which would benefit them at the long term.
See, as long as the state is delivering, then the state has the power to call the shots.
Okay.
Then the indigenous groups
will not
become irrelevant, become redundant. So in a place like Tripura, those groups have become redundant because you have a strong chief minister who makes sense, who is calling the shots, who is proving it, who is delivering it. I mean, he stops delivering, I suppose he'll be out. But in other states, I suppose there is a complete deficit of trust between the common man and the leader, political leadership. There is a lack of total vacuum of leadership, and that's when these indigenous groups are going to come in and are going to come in and make such kind of demands where you have to give in. I mean, everyone says the key is governance, and then then the government would say that governance can come in only when there is peace. But I think looking at the larger picture, even in Manipur, besides the fatigue, the classical fatigue of the insurgent groups and slowly weaning and slowly giving in, a lot of leaders have also been handed over. So that has made a lot of difference. But I think still that environment has to be much more different, because I am not just looking at governance, I'm also looking at that parallel economy. When that has to be, there is nobody who is addressing that parallel economy, neither the center nor the states. Look at that big picture of like I told you, human trafficking, wildlife economy, wildlife parts, of arms trade and narcotics. That's really, really serious. And I don't think so that anybody has a policy to address
those issues. Okay. Thanks a lot, Kishalay, for speaking to us. And it's I still need to complete the book, but I have enjoyed it so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.